Okay, this was the link in the last video that I did, or the recent video I did, where it showed that uh, people of sub-Saharan Africa ancestry have a 19% unknown ghost hominid in their genetics that no one else has, and this kind of dovetails with it. But of course, it was the thing that was said to be clicked on, that they had recently shown that there were archaic humans that lived on in Africa long after they, or we thought that they had died off in the rest of the world and became Homo sapiens and so on. We'll get into this here a little bit, but this is in from BBC News, and it's from 2011. They have this. One wonders if they would even come out with an article like this today, even if they knew of the information that was found. Skull points to a more complex human evolution in Africa. Here's a presentation that's going to be given by Professor Chris Stringer, and what he's going to do is compare one of the 13,000-year-old skulls found at Iwo Eleru with the one on the right here, which is a Homo erectus form that's 140,000 years old, that was still found in Africa, lingering on, but comparing them to what we would see in a modern day of the same type form. So this form here, we find its earliest date at Asselar Man at 4,400 BC. And before then, they found quite a few skulls in between these datings, but they all have this protoform that's found in this one here. And by being able to do the recreation, you can pretty much take this skull cap, and if you could take this one and cut it off right above the eyes and take it off, you could take this and put it right there in the place of it, and it would show a much more connective to this point than to that. The oddity here is, of course, one is 140,000 years old and goes back further. This one is just 13,000 years old, or really they've redated it here at 9,100 BC. When they say 13,000 year old, they're talking about before present. We're in 2000. And then this form that happens later that we see in a modern day form. Let's look at the presentation here real quick.
This is a replica of a skull from Nigeria, and it was dug up in 1965 by Thurston Shaw and his team, an archaeologist. It is about 13,000 years old, and my colleague Katerina Havati used a new technique of digitizing the surface of the skull in 1972, and she found, as I did, that it does not look like recent African material. So here we've got a recent African skull, and here's the skull from Iwo Eleru in Nigeria. You can see that this skull is much longer, it's much lower, and all in all, it's got a much more what we could call primitive appearance, even though it's only 13,000 years old. And in Katerina's analyses, she found that the nearest neighbour, in terms of the overall shape of the skull, was this specimen from Tanzania, from a site called Ngoroba, which is, we think, about 140,000 years old. So you've got a specimen that's only 13,000 years old, but it looks like it should be, another 100,000 years older in terms of its shape.
So what's going on?
So this suggests that human evolution in Africa was more complex, that the transition to modern humans was not a straight kind of transition and then a cut-off. The archaic humans did not necessarily die away once they'd given rise to modern humans. They may have been living in some parts of Africa alongside, in a sense, their descendants, and perhaps exchanging genes with them. Just as Neanderthals seem to have interbred with people outside of Africa, archaic humans in Africa could have been interbreeding with modern humans inside of Africa, and this skull may show a reflection of that interbreeding between archaic and modern humans.
So, I hope that was loud enough, but it was quite quiet, and I don't have the Dolby thing on, so you probably heard an overall hiss in the background of it too, but you can probably get the gist of the idea of what that he's talking about here. Scientists have collected more evidence to suggest that ancient and modern human remains, or humans, interbred in Africa through remains. We're going to kind of discuss, and through this it kind of says pretty much what he said again, and we'll kind of talk about it and discuss it a little more. Reanalysis of the 13,000-year-old skull from a cave in West Africa reveals a skull that's more primitive looking than its age suggests. The results suggest that the ancestors of early humans did not die out quickly in Africa, but instead lived alongside their descendants and bred with them until comparatively recently. So the people that came out and into Europe and across Asia and to the Orient, and all of those people who have Neanderthal and Denisovan integration that we've seen and we're well aware of. This is something like that. And then, of course, this comes from the paper where it said they're up to 19% unknown ghost hominid add into here, and showing this skull and the way this goes through kind of leads a thought pattern, but no one really wants to go there. And that becomes a problem in a modern day where you can't really talk about things because of feelings and reality of situations. And so to the point of, even if you just want to be ambiguous about it and say that you're not sure, or that things don't point towards something or do point towards something, and leaving that out, and an omission is a way of almost lying in some ways. So the results are published in PLOS One. That's a research agenda site. So the skull found in the Iwo Eleru cave in Nigeria in 1965, this is one that's 9,100 BC, does not look like a modern human. It's a protoform. It doesn't look like the modern form of negroids that we even see today. And so this shows that there was perhaps integration from other people that lead to the modern genetics that we see in them today. But it also shows with the other paper that there's up to, well, roughly 20% of their genetics comes from some unknown ghost hominid, much like Neanderthal or some other archaic human form. And whenever we see the skull pass down through the age right here, it kind of telltale. It says, well, you must be that. And I don't know exactly, I guess I'll have to look into it, which exact form of Homo erectus or whatever they're looking at, like heidelbergensis or Idama, or just which one it is that they're trying to say goes towards this, and may not go with the Khoisan, which they've already shown that they're not related to those. And the Khoisan and them aren't related to neither each other nor Nilotics, that they're another variation on a theme that is sprouted out of this strange tryst of things that went on in archaic species that still lived on in Africa, like a land of the lost almost, compared to what came out of North Africa, if you will, and the rest of the world. I say North Africa because we find now at Eastern Africa, we had already seen skulls that go back to 200,000 years, and they seem to be a modern form. So modern form, there was a little argument on just simple little parts of skulls that aren't seen so much as they are today, and so on, that they have to come to consensus, and it seems like about 160,000. But they really had it going on in a modern form, what they would call Homo sapiens sapiens, here at 315,000 years. And this is found at Iwo Eleru cave in Morocco, or what we call Morocco today, in North Africa there, above the Sahara some. But then there was a time whenever the Sahara was green and a lot going on, and so opportunities in mixing, but it appears that mixing would have been with the people that would have been, up until extremely recently, an archaic form of humanoid, or a non-human, a form of Homo, if you will, though. The skull found in Iwo Eleru in 65 doesn't look like modern humans. It's longer and flatter, has a strong brow ridge, features closer, much more older skulls than Tanzania. It's still got that archaic look to it. thought to be around 140,000 years. Professor Katrina Havarti from the University of Tübingen in Germany used a new digitizing technique to capture the surface of the skull in detail. Back then it was kind of new and newfangled, or if you will, but nowadays they can do that real well. We did it recently on looking at the skulls of the Egyptians and how they used that to recreate the younger lady, and how that, the mother of King Tut and so on, and that's Nefertiti, and they did the recreation that goes along with that and so on. And they've used that, of course, on video games, making digital models and then capturing, and then they can blow that up to whatever the size they want that for you to fight and so on. So a lot of that's done in that way, and just used in many different ways. But the new technique improved upon the original measurements that were done with calipers by letting researchers see the subtler details about the skull's surface. So it was really in pieces pretty much, and with calipers and measurements and people trying to get a gist of the way it was. But by using this technique, they were able to take and piece the thing all back together, and of course they knew where the pieces that they had fit. And so by the art of the naturalness of it and put it together in a 3D form, they were able to reconstruct it and create this cast. And even though they act like this is the one, the pieces that are brown here are actually are cast off of the originals, and then the white stuff that you're seeing is plaster. And a lot of these research facilities have this skull, or an exact replica of it necessarily. The real one is probably not the one that he handled there with his hand, and it's probably a replica too. Nothing weird about that. So the cast of that Iwo Eleru skull shows marks of a more ancient ancestor. First of all, what we don't see here is a vaulted skull. Pardon me, finger of God come in here. But even though it has the brow ridges around here and those come back, then the skull slopes back and around. It doesn't come up and through the top of the picture and then dive back down. It's capped off, and it's much more smaller brain capacity and so on. And the type of thing that we actually see in archaic humans, along with other features that go along with it, that really match this more ancient form. These are scientists here. We're just going over this. The skull has got a much more primitive appearance, even though it's only 13,000 years old, says Chris Stringer from London's Natural History Museum, who is part of the team of researchers. This suggests that the human evolution in Africa is more complex. The transition to modern humans was not a straight transition and then a cutoff. Well, I think we realized long ago that it wasn't a straight transition and a cutoff, and we've already done this type of thing that you would look at in Africa and try to figure out the difference between the Central African pygmies and West African primitives that are still there today, and then the Khoisan and stuff. And they've done genetic tests onto them in swabs, which is basically taking them, ear swab type of looking device and just doing swabs on them. And in that, they already found another thing that I think predated the 18% hominid finding. That took a little bit more detailed tests to try to track down what they're looking at, but the swab showed that they had this something called a MUC7 gene. It has to do with the mucus and saliva that they have, and that it's different, and that it probably is from, again, not from the people and the things that came and went out of Africa and then reingressed back in and so on, but comes from probably this other archaic hominid that lived on in Africa much longer than previously thought, and did so on the others here. We look at Iwo Eleru in comparison to something like Jebel Irhoud, where Jebel Irhoud we're looking at, well, now we have a modern form, and then they're going to argue to the points on little bitty things, and it's about 140, 160,000 years ago. There's that modern form that we have today. Cro-Magnon is no longer referred to as that. He's early European modern humans. Why? Because European modern humans still have the exact genetics as he does today in a match, and the same haplogroups and so on. So it's not even a progression of situation. So all of that we talked about before kind of just fades out into something that looks much different. And we're finding that there's a lot of hybridization, and we realize that there's hybrids that went on between people that came out of Africa and twisted the Caucasoids that we know today. In fact, a variation of which, along with interbreeding with Denisovans and the Homo erectus species, like Peking man that's found in the Far East, led to a people that are more oriental, and a much later branching than this branch of 200 or 2.1 million years that would have possibly led to a common connective that they're saying with all of us, or with this African species and these archaic forms that apparently lived on in Africa much longer. But we had a Homo erectus forms everywhere else that were different. They led to different things happening, such as Neanderthal. And where does that come from? Because he has lighter hair and eyes, and it's funny, they were putting that on them a long time before they genetically found out, yep, that's about right, except for they look more like Chuck Norris and Shakira. You look at modern interpretations of them, and it shows you something that looks a little more that way. I did a video about that because things along that nature have changed a lot in my research time that I've been living here on the planet, and the way that they tried to show people. In fact, where they showed people, they said what Caucasoid people were like maybe 5,000 BC or 7,000 BC is all of a sudden shattered out to hell. And then we find things like Göbekli Tepe, and it's showing a much farther reach. But whenever you find genetics, it really does put a key point on things. And when you say this rapid evolution from one thing, that one thing that you were thinking of is actually a divulged, not the same thing anymore. And by the time they got to Homo erectus and their variations that did go out of Africa versus the ones that came and stayed in, there was already variation on a theme, which divulged further. And apparently there was something out there, whether it went out long before that and then it changed and then they interbred with that, or whether it was something that had developed out there on its own, and maybe this whole thing ricochets in a different way. But that led to other things that we know of as Denisovans that no longer exist, and Neanderthals, and all the forms of Homo erectus are all pretty much gone, but a portion of which lives on in modern day people from sub-Saharan Africa. So Professor Stringer suggests that human evolution in Africa was more complex. The transition didn't just go to a straight cutoff. And then, of course, if you're looking at a straight cutoff, then you would be looking at like, well, here's what happened to Caucasoids. Well, that's going to be different than what happened and developed eventually, a little later, into the Oriental forms that we see, are, of course, what we're realizing now and able to show about what formed the modern people of the West Sub-Saharan Africans as we know it. Professor Stringer thinks that ancient humans did not die away once they had given rise to modern humans. They may have continued to live alongside their descendants in Africa, perhaps exchanging genes with them until more recently than had been thought. The researchers say that their findings also underscore a real lack of knowledge in human evolution in the region. But paleontologists are not all agreed on precisely what the new analysis is telling us, or indeed whether it's telling us that anything at all. I do not think that these findings add anything new to our view, said Professor Clive Finlayson, director of the Gibraltar Museum, who is not connected to the study. Well, you're going to find some people that are going to take viewpoints, especially in a modern form, just a viewpoint that might have been allowed whenever this paper came out, is almost shunned nowadays, where you would have to go into a real long explanation and really put a lot of woo-woo behind it to end up indicating the same thing and just getting the same phrase out there, as if scientific jargon wasn't difficult enough in the first place. You'd have to get a lawyer involved, if you're following me. And now what? Well, now no one can understand it except for them, and they don't even want to read it. Well, doesn't that just suck? Well, why can't we do science straightforward? I think we should. Let's continue. Paleontologists are not all agreed on precisely what the new analysis is telling us, or indeed whether it is telling us anything definitive at all. I do not think these findings add anything new to our view, said Professor Clive Finlayson, director of the Gibraltar Museum. Again, I wonder if they saw the thing about the unknown hominid, this, that, and the other, and they go, does that have to do with that skull that you were talking about and everything? And now, do you have a slightly different view on that same point? And would you tell me in private? If I try to get it on film, you probably wouldn't want to talk to me. We have a few fossils and no idea of natural variation within populations. That the situation is not that simple and is deep and complex and what we should expect. And you're going to hear a bunch of rhetoric like that in the coming decades, probably, even on this type of subject. But what we're going to all come to the consensus of is that a few different things here. That archaic humans lived on in sub-Saharan Africa until a much more recent time, and due to reintegration from others, they ended up forming what we currently know as of them today. But also the human history of everybody is quite different. We understand that the early European modern human hunter-gatherers are said, Homo sapiens, are said to have had darker skin, but all blue eyes. In fact, I've got a couple of geneticists that both concur on this in different videos, David Reich and Johannes Krauss, so they're very famous on it. They say every single one that we've looked at and went into the genetics of, they all show this genetic blue-eyed connection. So when people try to make a connection, they go, well, blue eyes is only with pale people and stuff. It's like, no, that doesn't go with that at all. You know, they tried to make things out of Cheddar Man and stuff, and Labrana Man now. When you look at the old depiction that he did of them, that's probably a lot more accurate than the ones that they're trying to give today. And just a little bit, maybe not having the SLC gene that has somebody that has porcelain type skin, which is still able to tan, by the way, versus somebody that has a more olive type skin. Hell, I'm Irish and I've got a skin I often refer to as just about beach sand. Between that and cardboard, whenever I get a tan, I can really get on the edge of milk chocolate, people. But I've got other things in that too. I'm not just Irish. I'm Irish, Scotch-Irish, and Welsh-Irish. And that's just the recent thing that happened before the deal, and it goes on back. I don't know my exact genetics, by the way. I've just got close personal family members that have had it done, and, well, I guess if your sister has genetics and they tell you what her mtDNA is, you'll know that, and then brothers and so on, too, would indicate what yours exactly is. I try to kind of keep away from it, so I wouldn't try to grasp upon it much, just like trying to trace back more of my lineages, even more than what we did into our Scottish-Irish heritage that we did before, because it'll start to get more personal. In fact, that's one of the reasons I try to stay out of a more personal or a more current era and through the Dark Ages and all that happens, because that becomes much more personal to people, because it starts attaching it to things that I know. I mean, I'm well aware of who's a Watsa, and it starts to get personal. And rather than to besmudge my work with even things like that, I try to steer away from it as much as I can. They tell you we have a few fossils and no idea of natural variation within populations, that the situation is not that simple, deep, and complex. So this is going to be rhetoric that you'll hear that, yeah, but that could be just variations on a theme. You go variation to looking all the way exactly like this archaic species. Once they found that in the genetics it shows this, so could this be that? People would have to end up making that leap and telling you that, yeah, okay, so. And so things that maybe just years ago, just not long ago at all, would have been some type of racist or conspiracy of you trying to say something like that, and some conspiracy theory of how things, oh, that's not how it did happen. Seems to, again, in another piece of the puzzle, show that Well, that's kind of more how it happened. But the oddity here is that, just like there are islands where Komodo dragons and things lived on in the land that time forgot, being trapped up under the Sahara seemed to allow this thing, an integration, which really never happened and blended like it did everywhere else. And it wasn't just going out of Africa and getting a little touch of Neanderthal and so on. There were variations apparently before that even happened. In fact, the variation that we were talking about specifically is something that seems to have developed quite recently and doesn't really predate anyone here concerned, and shows to be another variation on a theme of the way the humans came about. Again, we've looked at this through the Caucasoid lens of early European hunter-gatherers and Western and Eastern and the first farmers and different, and then they got together and these guys came over and the Anglo-Saxons and how it all ran through. And we try to pick it apart with people that don't have that much history that you can look at. One way of peering the scope right directly through it, and even to ancient times, if we can acquire it, is genetics. That's the reason it's considered a ghost hominid, is because they don't have Homo erectus as genetics just yet. If they got it, maybe they could go, well, yeah, there's a... And you wonder if they found one that was out of Africa, Homo erectus, and they go, well, there's a little something, it's a... But if they found one that was in, like the guy on the far right of the three that 140,000 years ago, say they take a tooth and they were able to grab it, you can get the DNA out of that now, they go, ah, that's funny, now the ghost hominin gets identified. And we continue from there, and it progresses. Because the makeup couldn't have come from just one single setup. Even in Caucasians and stuff that we're looking at, we're a blend of people that were variation on a theme that were Caucasoid and derived in a certain way, so it left into the current people, and zoom, and now we're spacemen. So, looking back at all the variations on a theme that happened with different people, even though I guess in a modern day all you're going to hear is people call out racism towards it, is the only way we can find out the truth and reality of it all. In my other videos, I look at a lot of archaeology. I don't go into genetics so much, and I'm starting to incorporate it very much because a lot of my other studies and everything, people are comparing pieces of pottery and things I talk about, and it really doesn't go into a point that you can prove whether or not they just keep buying stuff from these guys with that pottery and they get the pottery with it. And so this ends up being some kind of crockery cookware, and you find that they've got that cookware, or is it the same people? I've showed an example. I've showed the Yamnaya culture and the things that ran through there, and it was, corded ware, and who are these people, and were they the same people, did they everything else? And the answer is yes, they were the same people before they deviated at the point. And even though these people had some kind of pottery that they never got over here, but the others shared this thing, they're the same people in the first place. Genetics goes, we are the same people. Now, separated from cultures, but constantly connected. Oh, more like a modern day East Coast, West Coast, and got it going on, and connectives, definitely. Rather than saying a totally different people or ambiguous left field thoughts. He goes on and says, in my view, it is the field of genetics that will help us most in clarifying matters, he told BBC News. I agree with that. And that's what I'm talking about right now, I guess, is that we used to talk about pottery and these people, and you can look at them in some of their cultures, and they've got some symbols with them and stuff like that. And we're prehistory, so we don't have any writing of them. We're trying to figure out what happened in the Wayback Machine. Genetics steps up to the plate and goes, they're the same people. No wonder they got about the same thing. Others show that before that, though, these people were slightly variations on a theme, and there used to be a darker skinned people up in Europe, and the people in Europe who we call Europeans today used to be in the Near East and Middle East, all around. We find their genetics in Egypt we've looked at recently with R1b, and that connectives and how it spans across the whole area. Well, that's what happened to them. This is a paper about what happened to bring about these people of West Sub-Saharan African descent. Separate research published earlier this month suggests that the genetic mixing between hominid species happened in Africa up to 35,000 years ago. So even in this old paper from 2011, they're now referring another, and so you're going to find this trail, and you have to pick through the trail, and this is where research comes in handy, but you have to pick through the trail and find out that they're saying, well, they're telling you that multiple hominid species bred with each other as earlier as recent as 35,000 years ago. And I think with the skulls and the way that you see it just changes, and all of a sudden they're looking at it and it changes like popcorn, that was another integration too. If they could get the genetics out of Iwo Eleru man and the genetics out of Asselar man, that would probably explain a whole lot. Just like looking at the genetics of modern humans and finding a MUC7 gene or this 19% unknown ghost hominid explains a lot, or really a verifier showing you that different people on this planet have variations on a theme. And you know what's weird and not racist too? That if you checked out these people that are on the Gilligan's Island type island thing, that you would find out, wow, they have connections to these older people here, and kind of the same people that ended up being the Aztecs and these people, and wow. So you can find out a lot of things that happened, timelines, and as this grows and grows, the timeline becomes more clear. Every once in a while, something throws a wrench in the machine though, doesn't it? Yeah, little finds like Göbekli Tepe or this unknown ghost hominid or things like that seem to throw a wrench in it for some people's views as we clarify mankind's origins. Like, share, and subscribe, and enjoy. We'll get on to more. I'm going to go check out that other article about 35,000 years ago. Peace.